Everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Carrie Minnick, and I'm a partner here on the nonprofit team with DWD. Also joining us today is Susan Berghoff. She is a director of our nonprofit team, so she will be behind the scenes answering any questions. Just a few things before we get started. A copy of the slides will be emailed out to all of the attendees today after the webinar. We will also be recording the webinar, and so the recording will be available on our website afterwards if you'd like to watch it again or share it with someone that maybe wasn't able to attend. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to put them in the question and answer or the chat window so we can answer those. We love to get feedback throughout. So if you have questions, or maybe there's something that you do with your organization that works really well that you'd like to share with the other attendees, please feel free to share that as well. Today's topic is board expectations. So before we get started, we kind of just want to get a gauge who we have in attendance with us. So if you would just take a second and type in the chat window if you are either a board member or maybe you're a staff member of a nonprofit, or if you're just, maybe just attending and you're not one of those. If you could just kind of tell us why you're attending. That way we can just kind of see who we have in attendance with us. So if you could just take a minute and just type in the chat window if you're a board member or a staff of a nonprofit, just so we can kind of see who we have with us today. Good, it looks like we have some board members and some staff, executive directors as well. Great, sounds like we have kind of an assortment of individuals associated with the nonprofits. Great, welcome. So before we get started in talking about specific board member expectations, I want to go over just some basic nonprofit items. Some of these are kind of things that sometimes people misunderstand, or items that we really just need to have a basic understanding of a nonprofit. So first of all, the term nonprofit, not-for-profit, probably not the best terminology to use for organizations. Nonprofit, not-for-profit does not mean no profit. So we want to keep that in mind. Being a nonprofit does not mean that you should not make money. You have to make money. You have to bring in more money than you spend in order for your organization to continue to exist. It's just obviously different because with a for-profit, the earnings are paid out to the owners. The nonprofit earnings go back into the organization. Nonprofits do receive a tax exemption from federal and state income tax, so you don't have to pay income taxes. However, organizations may still be liable for unrelated business income tax. We are not going to go into detail on what unrelated business income tax is in this webinar. It's basically activities that are not related to your nonprofit purpose. But just want to make sure that you are aware that as a nonprofit organization, you do not have to pay income taxes. Even though you're not required to pay income taxes, the IRS still wants to know what you're doing. And so most nonprofits, there's just very few that don't have to file a tax return, a 990, but most nonprofits are required to file an annual information return called a 990 with the IRS. That is filed annually. There's 3 different versions. It is very important that your organization file this every year, because if you fail to file it for 3 years in a row, you could lose your tax exempt status, which means you no longer exist as a nonprofit in the eyes of the IRS. And so that means people, if you're a 501c3 organization, people would not be able to take a charitable deduction when they give you contributions. Any money that you earn within the organization, you'd basically be a for-profit, so you'd have to pay taxes on it. So it is very important that you remember to file that annual 990 with the IRS. Private benefit is not allowable. So again, as a nonprofit, we exist for the community, for a large group. We don't exist for to benefit a specific individual. We exist for the community. So we just, when we're doing specific transactions, we need to make sure that we're benefiting our constituents as a whole, the public, as opposed to single individuals. And finally, no one owns a nonprofit, not the founder, not the executive director, the CEO, or the board members. No one actually owns a nonprofit. But given that, the board members are ultimately responsible for the organization and what it does. I'm sure many of you are aware of BoardSource. It's one of the leading organizations focused on strengthening and supporting nonprofit board leadership. They've been tracking and analyzing trends in nonprofit board leadership since 1994, and every 2 or 3 years they do a study. The most recent study was done in June of 2021, and the study was organized into 4 categories that you can see on the screen here: work, people, culture, and impact. And so you can go online and see the whole entire study, but I just kind of wanted to point out a few interesting findings. As a result of the study, these are the findings on the screen that you can see. Specifically, the last 2. Board and executives should reflect on what is prioritized in terms of board expectations and how time is spent. And then the board chair's leadership in ensuring that there are clear expectations of board service seems to matter most when it comes to the board's overall culture. So your board expectations, understanding what their roles are, is very important to being a successful organization. This is a part of the study. They asked the executive director and the board chairs how they felt on different activities, different responsibilities. And you can see here, understanding the board's roles and responsibilities got a B-. So, that's not too bad, but it's definitely not an A. So I think we really need to improve on making sure our board members understand the roles and responsibilities associated with their service to the organization. Setting up clear board expectations right from the start is really the key to increasing the effectiveness. And when you're looking at roles and responsibilities and expectations of your board, they might not be the same for the nonprofit down the road. Your nonprofit's mission is unique and it's different from other organizations. So just because you have a certain expectation of your board, it may not be the exact same as the board down the street. It's probably very similar because you're all nonprofit boards, but it doesn't mean that they are all exactly duplicate the same for every nonprofit organization. So we're going to talk about some general ideas for you to focus on, and then you can kind of tweak them to how they fit your organization. So in the beginning, no matter what board it is, no matter what organization, there are 3 fiduciary duties that all nonprofit board members have: the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. So basically, you're putting the nonprofit first. You're making the best decisions that you can on behalf of the organization. You're putting the interest of the organization ahead of your personal or professional interest, and making sure that the organization, follows any laws, whether they be federal, state, or local, and adheres to the mission. So that's great. These are high-level duties that the organization has. But okay, so what really does the board do? So yes, these are your big high level, what they're legally responsible to do, but let's take a look more of what they're actually doing month to month. One place to start is, again, I'm referencing BoardSource's 10 basic responsibilities of nonprofit board members. They categorize them into 3 different categories here, as you can see, and these are very summarized points from the different responsibilities. You can go onto BoardSource's website and get more information. They also have a book that you can get that talks about each one of these 10 basic responsibilities. But what we're going to do today is kind of dig into specific things, activities, responsibilities, not just these 10 basic responsibilities, but as a board member, what do you really do? So the first thing, no matter what organization you serve, you really need to understand your organization, because you are ultimately responsible for the mission statement. You are an ambassador for the organization in the community, with your family, friends, the people that you work with. So you really need to be able to understand what the organization does and also effectively communicate it. have a clear understanding of the organization's missions and its programs, be able to share it with others, specifically through stories. If you're able to share stories of how the organization impacted its clients or the services it provided, that really allows individuals to get a better understanding of what the organization does. But it also, it pulls on the heartstrings. So especially if you're asking for support, sharing stories is very beneficial to sharing what your organization does. Also understanding the organization's space that it operates in and how current issues are impacting it. So for example, let's say your organization does something with education, and maybe there's some specific laws or regulations that the organization has to follow in this education space. So it's important for you to at least have a basic understanding of, hey, there are some rules and regulations that we have to follow. What are those? Having a basic understanding. Obviously, the executive director and the staff of the organization are going to be in the weeds, but you as a board member should understand that there are those rules that we have to follow because we operate in this space, and making sure that we're following those. And then also, if maybe there's something currently going on in the economy or with the government that's going to have an impact on your organization, staying up to date on those, what's going on in the news is also going to be very beneficial as a board member. One thing that gets talked about a lot as a board member is compensation. So if you've never served on a board before, most nonprofit board positions are voluntary and you do not get paid. That's not true for all board members. I do know, especially in Fort Wayne, Allen County, I know of a few nonprofit boards that are paid, but for the most part, in general, board member service is not paid, it's voluntary. However, and there's no rule that said board members cannot be compensated. If your organization does choose to compensate your board members, you just need to make sure that you follow the same rules that you're following when you determine your CEO or executive director's compensation. It needs to be reasonable. And you also need to document in writing how you came up with that, and use comparability data, and also have it approved by maybe someone that's not going to benefit from actually being paid. So again, it's okay. You can pay your board members if you want. Most people don't, but if you do, just make sure that you have the process documented, just like you do for your CEO or executive director, because the IRS does ask about that on the Form 990. Reimbursement of expenses is allowed. That's common if you do, have to travel, or you purchase an item, supplies, or something for the organization for the board meeting, and you need to reimburse it. That's perfectly fine. Just make sure that you have a process in place to do that and have adequate supporting documentation to show that it is for a reasonable business expense. All right, so next let's talk about meeting attendance and preparation. So as a board member, you're going to go to meetings. It's very difficult to fulfill your duties if you're not engaged and not attending board meetings. Most boards will meet either monthly and take July and December off, while you have other organizations that will meet quarterly. It just depends on the nonprofit. Usually those boards of organizations that have been around for a longer time and are more kind of set, things are operating very smoothly, they have a full staff, those boards probably may meet less than other organizations that are still growing, in the middle of something where monthly meeting attendance is needed. Based on that board source survey that I was talking about earlier, they found that 84% of boards reported regular attendance of greater than 75%, and only 28% of boards reported regular attendance of greater than 90%. So really that should be our goal, is to getting at least 90% of our board members in attendance. Obviously, stuff happens, life happens. You might have a family emergency, you might be sick, work events, responsibilities. We all understand that things happen, But most organizations do require a certain percentage of board member attendance. With COVID and the pandemic, a lot of organizations have gone to a virtual option, which is really nice. However, I know me personally, when I serve on nonprofit boards, I want to be in attendance as much as I can in person, just because you kind of miss out on things if you're just doing it virtually. Virtual option is really nice if, I wouldn't be able to attend this meeting, I have another meeting and I can only attend it via virtual. That's fine. But just as a board member, you signed up to be on this board, just try and make it to all the meetings that you can. And also not just being there, but actively participating in the discussions. They wanted you to be on the board for a reason, and they want to hear what you have to say. Also, you're probably going to receive a board packet, hopefully ahead of time. Make sure you look that over prior to the meeting, not at the beginning of the meeting, not when they're actually talking about it at the meeting, but prior to going to the meeting. Again, based on the board source survey that was done, 41% of boards sent out meeting materials at least 1 week in advance. So if you're with us and you're on the staff side, just maybe kind of consider how far in advance you send out your information to your board members. I think a week is probably a good time period there to get that out in front of them so they have ample time to review it. Next is committee participation. Depending on the organization, they may have 2 committees, they might have 5 committees, maybe they have no committees. So it just depends on the organization as to how many committees are actually in existence. Some common committees are on the screen: executive, governance, finance, audit, resource development, and program. There's no rule that says your board has to have a certain number of committees or certain committees. However, committees allow board members to connect with a specific aspect of the organization, to get a little bit more into the details. For example, finance, they're going to get more into the actual finances. Program is going to get more into the actual, what are we doing within the different programs. Most organizations will require their board members to serve on at least 1 committee. Most boards also have outside people that are not on the board serving on various committees. Usually the executive committee and governance committee consists only of board members, but finance, audit, other types of committees usually invite other people from outside of the board to participate, which is a really great source for getting new board members. I know a lot of nonprofit organizations will invite someone to serve on a committee first before joining a board. So this is a really great practice to have. So again, when you join a board as a board member, you're probably going to be asked to serve on 1 or more committees. And so that's something to think about. One thing to keep in mind is committees cannot act in place of the full board. So they cannot make any significant decisions on behalf of the board. They can recommend certain decisions to the full board, and then the board can say yay or nay. But the board, full board, all of the board is ultimately responsible for the organization, and they're the ones as a whole are going to make the significant decisions for the organization. As far as the committee work, committees usually meet maybe once a month or every other month. It really depends on the organization. Usually each committee will have a charter to say what they do. Also maybe having goals for the year, so you can actually understand what your responsibility is. So, we're talking about board expectations, and we'll talk about, documenting those later. That goes for committees as well. What are your expectations? What does each of these committees do? Committees are also really great in dealing with issues that may be better solved with just a small group instead of having the full board discuss something. So again, getting down more into the details of specific areas, maybe having people that have backgrounds or specific skills in these certain areas, serving on these different types of committees, and then they can bring their decision to the board for full approval. So along with that, knowledge and skills. Again, you were asked to be on the board because you probably have certain knowledge and skills that are going to benefit this organization. And as a board member, some things to remember is you don't necessarily always need to go along with the group on every single thing. Obviously, you don't want to be a disruptive board member, but you need to be able to think independently. Just because everyone else in the group is thinking a certain way, that might not be the right answer for that situation. There might be some other alternatives. So don't be afraid to think independently. Ask questions. More than likely, if you have a question, someone else probably has the exact same question or a similar question. So please speak up. If you need more information, ask for it. So if you are discussing a new program, or you're looking at the financials, or just really anything, and you just don't feel like you have enough information or more information would be beneficial, ask for it. You as a board member are responsible for making decisions on behalf of the organization in the best way possible. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that you have the information you need to make the best decision. Sometimes you might have to vote no, and don't be afraid to vote no. Obviously, in the end, it's whatever the consensus of the board votes. But if there is something that you are against or don't think that it's in the best interest of the organization, vote no on that. That is perfectly fine. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're doing it in a respectful manner and hear all of the discussions. Again, don't be a disruptive board member. But sometimes when you have that board member that does play devil's advocate in a good way, that's really going to benefit the organization. Because I think, when you think about it, you really want to have, wouldn't you rather have somebody internal to the organization bring up these different concerns as opposed to someone from the outside? And then also seek training. So if you maybe it's your first time on the board, you've never served on a board before, or maybe you don't quite understand nonprofit financials, there's different training opportunities out there. Again, I referenced BoardSource before. They have a lot of information on their website. A lot of it's free. You can sign up to be a member and get additional information, but they have a lot of good articles out there. The Follinger Foundation in Fort Wayne also has the Barbara Burt Innovative Leader Fund that provides grants to nonprofit board members for unique learning experiences. So maybe your board wants to go to a workshop or attend a conference. There is funding out there that you can apply for to help pay for that. We on our website, on DWD's website, we also have a lot of helpful blogs, previous webinars that we are putting out there to hopefully help board members with different types of questions. So don't be afraid to ask questions and seek additional training if needed. That's just going to make you a better board member. A lot of organizations, board members will create a skills matrix. So on the left side here, we have the name of our board members, and then across the top, we have the different skills that we need. So a lot of nonprofits, you'll need somebody that has legal knowledge, need somebody that has accounting. If you have a large investment balance or endowment, maybe you'd like somebody that knows about investing in different types of stocks, fundraising, marketing, HR. In this on the screen here, I included education, and the last column here, this would be for an organization that again, maybe is specifically provides education service. So maybe if you had a organization that provides mental health counseling, maybe you would want someone that is specific, has that kind of knowledge and experience in the mental health arena. So look at within your organization to see what is going to benefit your organization, and those are the different types of skills that you can put on your skills matrix. And then you can see who within your board has those, and that will kind of help you figure out what you're missing and who to look for when you're looking for new board members. And the IRS they believe that a board really needs to be independent and diverse. And so it should really have members that represent various backgrounds and professions. So again, that's kind of what this does, allows the skills matrix, allows the nonprofit to see what they're missing and what they need to fill those different areas. Some smaller nonprofits may use this to help more with actual day-to-day work. So, you know, you have your large kind of more that have been around for longer organizations. They're fully staffed, you know, they have an internal fundraiser, internal marketing. Maybe some small organizations that are just starting or very small don't have a paid employee to do some of these things. So they may rely on the board to do some of that stuff. So that's something to consider too when you're joining a board, is what kind of staff do they currently have in place and what are they relying on board members to do? So if the organization is very small, you as a board member that has a specific skill or expertise, maybe a little bit more involved in some of the day-to-day activities as opposed to a larger organization that has a fully staffed department for that. Let's see. Okay, let's talk about financial oversight. So as a board member, you are responsible to provide financial oversight. Okay, we know that not everyone is an accountant. Not everyone has a financial background. And we do not want a board full of accountants because that would just not be good. We want, like I said, a diverse pool of board members. But regardless, you as a board member still are responsible for providing that financial oversight. So what does that mean for someone that maybe doesn't have a huge significant experience with finances? First, assisting in developing the annual budget. So budget is basically your plan for the year. Where are you going to go? Where are you getting your money from and what are you going to spend it on? So what you need to do is look at your budget, and hopefully when they give you the monthly financials, it's current compared to budget so you can see where you are. So when you're looking at the budget is actually going to be more than likely developed by staff and management, and then it goes to the board to approve it. So when you're looking at it, does it look reasonable? Does it look like it's can be attainable, or is it like something that's way out there, like, okay, we're going to get $2 million of contributions this year. We've never gotten $2 million of contributions this year, so why in the world would we put that on our budget? So look to see when you're looking at the budget, is it reasonable for what you know what the organization does? Compare it to last year's actual. You know, if last year we only raised $500,000 in contributions, but the budget has $2 million, that's just not, that doesn't make sense. So question that. So, but your budget is very important because it's the roadmap for what you're going to do for the year. Ensure proper financial controls. So as a board member, again, as the whole board, you are responsible for the organization. Internal controls protect the organization's assets. So controls are like segregating duties. So making sure that not one person does everything, that one person doesn't have access to everything within the accounting department. That's an opportunity for fraud. Do you have written policies and procedures in place? So just, again, you know, getting into the weeds is the staff and management's responsibility, but you as a board member should understand whether there are controls in place, or whether there are written policies and procedures in place to make sure that the assets of the organization are being protected. I mentioned monthly financials, so hopefully you are looking over the monthly financials. Normally, the financials will include balance sheet and income statement. Should also be compared to last year and then compared to budget too, because if you're just looking at the current and don't have anything to compare it to, how do you really know where you're at? Having those comparisons to prior year or to budget really helps you analyze whether the current activity is reasonable. Also, when you're looking at the financials, even if you don't understand what all the numbers are, ask questions, but you know, does it look reasonable? So for example, let's say you know that this month we bought a whole bunch of computers. We spent a whole bunch of money on computers. So if you look on your equipment line, there better be a huge increase in equipment because we just bought a whole bunch of computers. And if it's not, then you should ask. Or let's say, hey, they talked about how we got this new grant. It's $500,000, but where is that in these financial statements? So just understanding, what staff and management are telling you what's going on, what you know that's going on within the organization, and then looking to see if you can find it in the financials. Not all organizations have an audit done or a review by an outside CPA, but if you do, you as the board should really review and approve that audit. Oftentimes an audit is required because a funder will require you to have it in order to get a grant. So once the audit is done, that audit will probably be given to that funder. So before it's given to that funder, you might want to look to see if it looks reasonable, to see if they've done the right job. Oftentimes the auditor at the end will meet with either the finance or audit committee. Sometimes they'll also meet with the board. So if you have that opportunity as a board member, take it. Ask the auditor your questions. What did they see in their testing? Did anything pop up unusual or that they're concerned about? What kind of recommendations do they have that can help you improve your operations? As an auditor, which is what I do, sometimes we go in and ask questions, and if we don't ask the question the right way, or sometimes things aren't always given to us, not because for any kind of trying to hide anything, but just because we didn't know to ask for it and they didn't know to give it to us. So when you're having that extra set of eyes look at it, making sure that everything is recorded properly. And that goes to the Form 990 as well. So again, almost all organizations have to file an annual Form 90 with the IRS. This form is open to public inspection, which means anyone can look at it. They're out there on the internet, on the IRS website, on GuideStar. So you want to make sure that that form the items are reported properly. Form 990 has a lot of financial information, but it also has a lot of non-financial information. So governance questions, do you have certain policies in place? And so again, like I said, anybody can look at it, watchdog groups, potential donors, funders. So it's very important to make sure that those questions are answered properly and accurately portray what your organization is doing. There is a question on the 990 that asks whether a copy of the 990 has been provided to the board to look at before it's filed, because the IRS wants to know if your board is involved in reviewing Form 990. Also on Form 990, you as a board member, your name is listed on that form. So if something happens during the year, anyone can see that, hey, you were on the board, you were running that organization when that happened. So it's important that you as a board member look at that form to make sure that everything is reported properly. Again, ask questions. I can't say that enough. As a board member, if you have questions, ask. And then finally, your board will probably have a treasurer. The treasurer will probably have financial background. However, don't rely 100% on just the treasurer. If you have a question, ask. You again, as a board member, should be reviewing the 990, the audit, the financials. Don't just have the treasurer review it. You as a board member need to take responsibility to review those items as well. And also that's a good opportunity, talked a little bit about training earlier. If you would like to maybe find out more information, understand the financials better, set up a meeting with the treasurer. So that way you can go sit down and then he can go through and walk through the financials with you. This is how our organization records things. This is what this means. So that way you can get a better understanding and do your part as a board member more effectively. Again, with the question on the 990 where it asks whether a copy has been provided to the board prior to filing, in order to answer that yes, it has to be an exact copy of what is provided to the IRS. So there is a schedule B, that lists donors over a certain dollar amount. So it will say like the donor's name, the donor's address, and then the dollar amount. Sometimes that is not given to everyone to look at just because for privacy, and that Schedule B is not open to public inspection. So if you were to go look at your 990 out on the IRS website, that Schedule B is not going to be in there, but the board should review that Schedule B as part of their review of Form 990. So every schedule that is filed with the IRS in full needs to be reviewed by the board in order, or to be provided to the board for review in order to answer that question, yes. And as we're talking about, board responsibilities, the next thing is evaluating the executive director or the CEO. So as the board, we are ultimately responsible for the organization as a whole, not just as a single board member, but as a whole. That's why we have 5 people listed on the top. So we can't make individual decisions, but just as a whole. We as a board only have 1 employee, that's the executive director. And that's why I circled in red, there's only 1 connection to the organization. We are as the board, hire the executive director, evaluate the executive director. The executive director is responsible for everyone else. They're responsible for the finance director, program directors, the staff, everyone underneath of them. So we as a board are not going to be evaluating staff members or getting involved in the day-to-day, everyday operations. I think that's sometimes difficult for some board members to remember and to understand, as we as a board only have 1 employee, the executive director, and then the executive director is responsible for the day-to-day operations. However, we are still, as the board, responsible for evaluating the executive director. Usually that's done annually as part of, looking at the compensation for the next year. As part of the evaluations, there's going to be different aspects, maybe something to do with fundraising, program accomplishments, their involvement in the community, their work with other employees. So it can be a wide variety of questions that it's covered. Usually the board chair or someone from the board will send out an evaluation for each of the board members to complete. Please complete that. I know everyone is very busy, but it's important to submit your response to those questions so that they can get an adequate, a full picture from all of the board members for the executive director. And it's a really good opportunity to provide goals for next year for the executive director, as far as running the organization. So just please participate in that evaluation when you get that email. Next is advocacy. So policy decisions at whether it be the local, federal, or state levels are going to impact the way nonprofits do their work, whether it's how we access funding, laws and regulations that govern their work, if they're in a specific arena like mental health or medical or education, or policy decisions that affect the people that we serve. By engaging in advocacy, nonprofit leaders can ensure that their missions of their organizations and the people that the organization serves are not forgotten when important decisions are made. So it's very important to understand how those public policy items impact your organization's mission. One way that you can do this is oftentimes board members are leaders in the community and they work with other organizations. So if you know someone, connect the organization, the ED or whoever within the organization to those other community leaders and potential partners. Also working with people to educate how different policies will impact those that you serve, making sure that you understand that. One thing to keep in mind, though, is advocacy, lobbying, and political activity are 3 different things. 501c3 organizations are absolutely prohibited from being involved in political activity. So do not get involved in political activity. What that is considered is any activity that supports or opposes a candidate for public position. So as a nonprofit, as a representative of the nonprofit, you cannot go out and say, my name is Carrie Minnick. I am on the board of ABC organization. And as that board representative, I say that you would go vote for John Smith for governor. Cannot do that. You can do all kinds of political activity in your personal life. We're not trying to limit that. You just cannot do it on behalf of the organization. Now, lobbying is different. Lobbying is intended to influence legislation. So 501c3 organizations can do some lobbying, however, it cannot be significant. So a little bit of lobbying is okay, just cannot be significant. Then finally, advocacy, and that's really what we're talking about here. And every nonprofit should be advocating for their mission and what they're doing. That's really just making your voices heard on the issues that affect the lives of those people that you serve. Again, how those different laws that are going to be passed, how they're going to impact your organization and the people that you serve. So just when you're getting into this arena, it's important to understand the differences between the three. Because the IRS does not like it if 501c3 organizations involved in political activity, they may actually take your tax exempt status away. If you are involved in too much lobbying, they may take your tax exempt status away or make you pay penalties. So just understand what it is that you're doing in certain arenas. Okay, fundraising. Probably the most talked about thing when joining a board. Do I have to fundraise? So again, in Board Sources survey that they did, they found that the board's role in fundraising is one of the lowest areas of board performances, which is probably not uncommon. I don't think that's something that usually people join a board necessarily to fundraise. However, there are different things that you can do to fundraise to support the organization aside from just writing a check. So obviously we want all board members to make a meaningful gift to the organization. And we'll talk about that on the next screen, but then also inviting others to contribute, going back to those being able to share stories, especially personal stories, can kind of help others to see what the organization is truly doing, and then help them to see how their contribution can make a difference. Make introductions to possible donors. So again, a lot of nonprofit board members are leaders within the community. They know other people. Make that introduction between your executive director and this other person that you know that probably would support the organization. Identify possible grant opportunities. So, hey, maybe you heard, this foundation over here is going to have this grant opportunity. Share that with your board. Is that something that we could apply for? Thank donors. So a lot of times nonprofit organizations will have board members write personal thank you notes or call up a contributor just to thank them, to show their appreciation. If your organization has an annual fundraiser event, buy a table or attend it, invite others to the fundraising events. And then finally, use your social media. So, I know a lot of organizations will put stuff on Facebook or LinkedIn, just sharing what is going on with the organization, making others aware of what the organization is doing and any possible events or opportunities to support the organization. So again, going back to making a personal contribution, a lot of times nonprofit boards will require a board member to make a contribution, but they may not say the dollar amount. So some will straight up say, you have to give X dollars to the organization. I think that's kind of gone away, but some may still have that. Some may say, hey, we want you to give and make us one of your top 3 organizations that you give to. Or some might just not say anything, but they just say, hey, we want you to, make a significant contribution. And significant is up to you and to what that means. However, it's very important that all of board members on a nonprofit board give to the organization, because if your board members do not give to your organization, why should anyone outside of the organization give to your board? And that's what a lot of fundraisers will look at, or funders will look at. They will look to see the percentage of board members who donate and then use that in determining whether they want to give to the organization or not. So again, it's not necessarily dollar amount, it's actual how many of your board members are giving to your organization. And it's much easier as a board member to ask others to give if you yourself have given. It's kind of difficult to go ask somebody else to give to the organization if you yourself haven't given. And then also by giving a contribution to the board, it just gives the board member a stronger sense of investment. Next is conflicts of interest. So sometimes, so a conflict of interest is when something pops up that a board member, in this case, may benefit from. So for example, let's say I'm a board member on a nonprofit board, and let's say my spouse runs an advertising company, and the board is looking for a new advertiser just by chance. And so they are talking about using my husband's advertising company. So that could potentially be a conflict of interest because I am married to the person that has this advertising company. And because of my relationship with the organization, this person could benefit from being paid for advertising from the organization. And maybe they would charge them a little bit more than they would other places because they know of my connection to the organization. So that's a bad conflict of interest that we don't want to happen. So conflict of interests just need to be disclosed. The organization can certainly move forward with paying that advertising company that I'm related to. We just want to make sure that that they're paying the same rate that everyone else would, and that there's no benefit that my spouse is getting. So it's important as a board member to make sure that you disclose those potential conflicts of interest. So that would be, again, like other organizations that you're involved with, if you own a business, if your spouse owns a business, if you have some kind of control over other type of an organization, they really need to know about that. And so there's actually a question on the 990 that asks if there's an annual conflict of interest statement signed and how it's enforced. So if your organization doesn't already have you sign a conflict of interest as a board member, that's something that you should probably consider putting into place, and then have that signed annually. But then also, throughout the year, if something comes up that, because relationships change. So maybe I've moved to a different company. I'm the president of XYZ company now. So everyone just needs to be aware of that. So if there are any potential business transactions that come up, everyone is aware of that. And then I would abstain from voting on anything like that. So it's fine, again, to do business with companies related to your board members. We just need to make sure everyone is aware of it, and so that there's no personal benefit. So again, making sure that you disclose any potential conflicts of interest annually and when things change. So, we talked about all these expectations. So we really need to document them, write them down. Written job descriptions, board member responsibilities really should be a part of the onboarding process. So as from the nonprofit perspective, when you're going out and recruiting new board members, you want to make sure that you provide them with the written job description expectations. As a potential board member, the individual really needs to ask what those are, so that way you're aware of what those are before you sign up. And in order to make sure that you can, yes, I can commit to these. I know some organizations will have a written, job description, just like any other staff person, but then they'll also have like a board member responsibilities that the board member will sign annually, just to remind them of, hey, as a board member, this is what really we're expecting you to do. And in order to ensure that they are doing that, a lot of nonprofits will have a board member report card. So this could be an example of one. So maybe one of the expectations is that board members attend at least 80% of all board meetings. So as you can see, they just put this on a document and say, so for John Doe, board member, he has gone to the January, February, and March board meetings. One of the other things that is required is to attend an annual fundraiser. Well, maybe he didn't go, or it hasn't happened yet, so that box is not checked. provide a meaningful contribution to the organization, check, okay, he made his contribution at the beginning of the year, so he's done that. So having this report card, should we say, and updating it at each meeting or throughout the year, making it just kind of reminds people throughout the year what they're doing, opportunities that they can do to better support the organization, and remind them of what they signed up for. So in this instance, again, every board member would have their own report card that would have these key items on it, and then they would update it throughout the year so that they can see, okay, what have they been doing? What do they need to do? And then normally the governance committee, or if you don't have a governance committee, maybe the executive committee will maintain these report cards just to make sure people are doing what they should be doing. And then in some instances, maybe somebody needs a little push or a reminder to see, to make sure that they're doing those things that they said they would do. And then lastly, let's talk about termination or resignation. So sometimes it is possible for board members to be terminated. They may be asked to resign. Perhaps they are not meeting the expectations of attending meetings and they're just not engaged, and stuff happens, maybe they got a different job, maybe they, got married, had kids, I don't know, things happen. And so sometimes board members can be asked, and it's fine if they're not meeting their expectations, to terminate a board member in order to get someone else in that position that's going to be more engaged and more beneficial to the organization. But then also on the other side, if you as a board member have determined that, hey, I signed up for this last May, but I don't have time to do this anymore. It's really your responsibility to voluntarily resign and say, I signed up for this, but I can't meet these expectations any longer. So I'm going to have to resign. And that's one thing I know on some of the boards that I've been on that board member responsibilities list that they have the board member sign. One of the last item on there is voluntarily resign if you cannot meet these expectations, because really it's not going to be beneficial for either the board member or the organization if you are not engaged, not coming to meetings. It's better to just remove yourself from the organization and allow the organization to fill that position with someone else that's more engaged, that can come to the meetings. Again, life happens. Also, when we have board members step away, it allows for new blood, new ideas to come in. So it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it could be a good thing. So I want to thank you for attending. That's all I had. Again, those are just kind of some ideas to think about. Hey, as a board member, this is probably what I'm going to be expected to do as a nonprofit, representing the nonprofit. Maybe these are some things that if we don't already have in writing, we should consider putting down for our board members to do. I think Susan's answered some of the questions here in the chat and Q&A. I just wanted to remind everyone that the slides will be emailed out to everyone afterwards. There will also be a recording on our website, so you can go watch that or share that with someone else afterwards. If you haven't visited our website yet, I would encourage you to do it. We have a special section just for nonprofits. We have nonprofit blogs, and then we also have our monthly webinars on the screen here. You can see January and February, this one that we've already done the recordings will be available out there. There's also recordings of prior year ones out there. And then you can also sign up for our upcoming ones for the rest of this year. If you have any questions or ideas for future webinars or blogs, or if there's anything that we can do to help your organization, please contact us. Both Susan and I and the rest of our teams. Information is on that front screen, first slide that will be emailed out to you. So feel free to contact us. And again, I just thank you so much for coming. And thank you for all you do for our community with your nonprofit.